my name is Peng, he, him, his, and welcome to join the panel, A Journal Through Transition. This panel is brought to you by Cooper Hewitt, Smithsonian Design Museum, Knowledge Integration and Service Impression. This panel is about our story of developing our next generation API service for Cooper Hewitt's collection data. Cooper Hewitt launched our first and also our current API service 5 years ago. And as you can see, it is a little bit longer, and we think it's time for us to step into another chapter, especially after last year's pandemic. And we are still in the journey currently, but through this opportunity, we'd like to share with you what stage we are at now, what challenges we have overcome, and also hear your feedback and questions. Through this panel, we wish to provide you with our experience and our stories that can help you evaluate requirements to build an API service for your museum or institution and how to start. The first part of the panel is a brief introduction, and then we'll follow up with QA as a second part, and then a little bit short summarize before we end the panel today. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat, and we'll answer during the QA session, or you can just ask during the QA. Before we dive in the panel, I would like to introduce our panelists from different professional backgrounds. So our first panelist is Wendy Rogers. She's our head registrar from Cooper Hewitt. Hi, Wendy. And our next panelist is Ferrer. She is the collection assistant from product design and the decorative arts department, also from Cooper Hewitt. Hello, Crystal.
Hi.
And the next one, we have Peter Pavement. He's the CEO from Service Impression. Hello, Peter.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
And then we have Rob Tice. He's the director from Knowledge Integration. Good evening, Rob. I think it's late there.
Hi.
And also it's Rob's birthday. Happy birthday, Rob.
Thank you.
The last is myself, Peng. I'm the digital engineer also from Cooper Hewitt as well. So before we dive in the panel, I would like to invite you to join us with a poll. So the question is, does your museum have an API for its collection data? And we have 4 answers. One's yes, the second one's no, but we'd like to have one. And the third is no, I don't think we need one. And the last one is I don't know. So that, of course, there's no right and wrong answer, but these are questions for us to know how you think about an API service. And do you think it's a must to have, or it's not necessary, or I don't know, because we need to go through different departments to collect their thoughts and feedback as well. So right now we see most the answer is yes, it's 6 from 9 votes, 67%. No, but we'd like to have one, the second place. And there's one person said, no, but I don't think we need one. That is very interesting. I would like to know, maybe in the QA session, someone who voted no, but I don't think, but you also don't think you need one can give us some feedback. And I would like to know the story or like the reason, which is totally cool, because making API can cost money and budget and energy, and you have a better way to deliver your data. You probably don't need the API at all. Do we have any more answer? Any more people want to vote to the poll? Well, the yes is still at the first place. And everyone know like why they don't want it. So no one voted don't know. Okay, thank you. The poll has ended. So the first is yes, still 6 votes among 9. 2 people voted no, but they would like to have one, and 1 person vote No, but they didn't need one. All right, thank you so much. So let's dive in our panel then. The first panelist I would like to introduce Wendy to tell the story of Cooper Hewitt Collection API and the TMS.
Great. All right. Hello, everybody. So I'm just going to start by setting the stage. In 2011, Cooper Hewitt closed for renovation. We took advantage of this closed period by reimagining everything about the museum, from brand identity to casework to visitor experience. We created the digital and emerging media department, who came in and developed a custom API. Unusually for the time, the team wanted this API to be the infrastructure upon which all visitor digital experiences were built, not just the website, but all the in-gallery interactives as well. Importantly for the collections staff, this API used TMS as the source of truth for collections data. This was extremely helpful, both because it funneled resources towards TMS, but also because it eliminated duplicate data sources, as well as forcing the staff to actually use TMS. So the API was a huge success, but flash forward to today, which is a huge leap in technological terms. Custom systems are great, but they need to be maintained and to be upgraded to meet changing needs, neither of which we did due to staff turnover and changing institutional priorities. The API for a period would not update collections data as it was changed in TMS, and sometimes it even pulled in the wrong data entirely. This led to sometimes strange relations with designers and donors, and also increasing staff frustration. Kang and the rest of the DEM team have made great strides in increasing the accuracy of the data extracted by the API, but it involves a largely manual process, wherein collection staff have to essentially tag records that they have updated. This is both time-consuming and also prone to user error, as often users forget to tag the record. And in addition, we also have some changing needs, which Crystal is going to tell you about.
Thanks, Wendy. Hi, all. I'm Crystal, and I'm speaking today on behalf of our Data Standards Committee at the Cooper Hewitt, acting as a curatorial representative of sorts. And today I'll be talking a little bit about our efforts to address our legacy data, our efforts to rework our data standards, and how we hope that will intersect with our new API to make our collection information more accessible. So we learned pretty early on that in order to envision our ideal iteration of the website, of the API, that we needed to get up close and personal with our data and with our cataloging standards at the institutional level, really across departments, which is work that hadn't been undertaken for a number of years. So to tackle this, we formed a data standards committee whose meetings really brought to light a number of questions, inconsistencies, and issues that we needed to tackle, but also some potential solutions and ways to move forward. For example, in terms of issues, something that constantly kept on coming up was maybe the less ideal way that we were using our website, maybe sometimes shelving considerations of best practices in service of the more immediate question of public accessibility to data, right? Just making sure that the data pulls to the website. In terms of solutions or potential ways to move forward, we're really excited to have recognized some underutilized or untapped fields, like, for example, classification, different title types, controlled vocabulary, and thesauri. We're convinced that the utilization of these fields can have a really immediate and powerful impact on the searchability of our data, not only for museum staff, but also for our public. So while we continue the long, hard, never-ending process of refining our data standards, the curatorial hope at Cooper Hewitt is that the new API can capitalize on some of the work that's already been done to make our collection information more searchable now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. So a little bit summarized from the current API and the TMS data and the current issues we are facing. Apparently, the first one is like Wendy said, when you updated TMS data, the API doesn't really reflect immediately. So it becomes very hard to know if for the content creator to know if they really put in the right data. And also the extraction process, which means the process from TMS to current API is relatively manual. So from a developer's perspective view, I have to really mark what objects got changes, what field got changes, and pull those data out. So it's cost more time and hence, to bring the first issue there. And the third one is our current API is difficult. You have to drop a lot of obstacles to build an application on top of it, which is a lot of, which is probably the main reason you want API. And the issue, following what Crystal said, is first the data standards, because the legacy data, the data which is not clearly defined, so which would make the data very hard to use sometimes. And also the next issue is the API architecture. So make the updates relatively slow, relatively manual, and very hard to QA, very hard for developers to work with. So this year, because we recognize the issue, we notice this issue, we know we need a new change, we know we need to step into a new chapter. Cooper Hewitt work with knowledge integration and the service impression to build our next generations of API. So next I'm going to invite Rob to talk with us about how the new API, how the new data pipeline can help tackle those issues we just mentioned.
Thank you, Kang. I think from what's been said earlier, it's probably important to recognize that the actual API itself is essentially only the icing on the cake, if you like, in terms of the kinds of challenges and requirements for the delivery of data. Cooper Hewitt were lucky in many respects that they had the knowledge of the existing API to look at the issues that they were trying to circumvent. But fundamentally, when you're looking at the API, the discussions that were had and the approach that was taken was to kind of look at the whole life cycle of data and media and the way that flows through the system from TMS and kind of out to the public data delivery. And so fundamentally, as well as kind of updating the new API and the technology, this was kind of about essentially improving the quality of life of the people who were trying to get the data online as much as anything, and trying to make sure that all those processes were hands off. So essentially the efficiency of the process was key. One of the other things which is becoming more and more important is that the scope of what is collections data is widening as well. So whereas within the context of the existing API, some of the areas that it was covered quite limited, expanding the API in terms of being able to deal with different entity types, but also different data sources in terms of things existing like the tags, databases, things like user collections. So basically making sure that the API and the data pipeline would be extensible, and also integrating with AI services to deal with things like the existing color classifications for the Cooper Hewitt data. So essentially from the data pipeline perspective, it was about streamlining and making that process efficient. And then obviously it's already been identified that the API and the technologies were looking in need of a refresh, and it's always very difficult to predict what might come along in future. So looking at the kind of scope and the types around cloud native, the decision to go with GraphQL and AAAF images, but also the recognition that sometimes it's not best to couple everything that you want to do to a single technology stack, because not all audiences want the same technologies. So even though the current requirement and the current approach to GraphQL, the approach to the whole processing pipeline was that in future other technology stacks would be able to be bound to the solution, so that it could evolve with different audiences. Aspects of the pipeline in terms of being able to enhance and improve the data within the context of the data pipeline, and to extend it in the future. Thank you. Next slide, please, Ken. So essentially, relatively simple, but the processes that we worked with the team at Cooper Hewitt, basically starting with extraction, which in this case is TMS, media, DAMs, user collections and tags. And then as it passes through the pipeline, we have models for that data which are optimized for searching and delivery. Obviously within the context of lots of systems, the data is optimized around the way institutions manage the data. And so sometimes there's a level of transformation that's required in terms of delivery for searching. The data is then essentially enhanced and data is aligned. So in terms of the enhancement, we're looking at automatically generating the AAA, dealing with aspects of potential reclassification, adding AI services like at the moment Google Vision for colors, and making sure that the data goes through the processes in terms of being ready to go online. We then check the integrity of the data. Things like are pointers between systems, do they actually exist? Are we able to resolve them? Does something that's public link to something that's private? Do we need to remove relationships as they, based on the different parts and different types of data in the graph and the different statuses? And what rules are there for publication for different entities, things like that. So that's the integrity check. And then for the cross-reference, we, in terms of what's published, we make sure that the data model for delivery can be aligned carefully with the requirements of the API. So as an example, the data that's published online can make sure that the queries that are required to service the questions that are being asked minimize the amount of effort in the query layer. So things like knowing what the impact of changed data is, things like knowing the impact of changed, for example, creator names within the context of the object data to minimize the joins that are required in the query. And obviously then the publication itself pushes the content out to the API layer and deals with the elements of authentication, the schemas that are available for different audience types, whether people are authenticated or unauthenticated. So if you like, in terms of this diagram, the API as an entity is essentially only, in inverted commas, the far right yellow part of this, and it's key within the context of the overall that all of those aspects and entities are considered to be part of the overall process. Next slide, please, Ken. So essentially, the decisions that were made overall in the process, and this is just kind of a general approach that was taken, decided that wherever possible, established technologies, potentially from different sectors who are working with APIs on a regular basis, technologies adopted by things like Netflix, PayPal, large scale enterprise entities. And so essentially we took the decision to base it on enterprise solution, which in this case is Elasticsearch, a delivery using IIIF media standards, the access to it on industry standard microservices gateway using Kang, making sure that the authentication mechanisms that we use were not hand delivered. They were using existing mechanisms like Keycloak, and obviously the extraction routines were automatic and could minimize the input from the staff. And obviously it's always worth, as was mentioned earlier, whenever developers tend to build APIs, the natural response when they're asked whether they can do anything is, yes, of course, I can do that. It's really easy. And it's always worth remembering, as was said, that when things are written and things are written in-house, then it's always worth it's not saying that you shouldn't write things in-house, but it's also worth remembering that to factor in the amount of effort and time it takes ongoing for the staff to be able to continue, maintain, develop and update the process. So there are costs in the implementation, but there are also ongoing costs within the context of it. And those were also taken into account as part of the data pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. So the next one we'll have Peter to talk to us about more on the front end and more on the user focused side before we build the API, how we understand requirements, how to understand our users. Please, Peter.
Thank you, Kang. So as Kang was saying, the user is at the heart of this new API. And we were very lucky to be able to build on the findings of a study that was undertaken by the Pratt Institute, led by Elena Villaspesa. And they did a usability study of 4 museum APIs, and that included the Cooper Hewitt's V1 API, the current one, and also the data services of the Met, the Smithsonian, so the Cooper Hewitt's parent, has its own API access to collections, and the Cleveland Art Museum. And so it was during the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021, so it was all through remote testing, and they had about 20 participants. And really, this was a great opportunity to understand why people use APIs, what they need from APIs, how they understand what an API is doing, and just to really try and gauge the need and for it. So the study looked at how people use cultural heritage APIs, so what kinds of methods they use, what situations they're in. They also the usability of the API interfaces, but also very importantly, the documentation of the APIs. So you might have the best system in the whole planet, but if it's not documented well, then it won't be used. And so this was a chance to kind of understand that and in a kind of comparative way across the 4 institutions. And also to just ask people, what do they want? What are they looking forward to do with it to really gauge demand? So as a result of this extensive testing, the Pratt Institute came up with 5 key recommendations. So the first one was just to empower users to get started easily. So often with APIs, there's a bit of a kind of learning curve while you figure out how this works and what you need to do and connecting to it. Often authentication is a barrier, etc. So really just to give people a quick way in so that they get to grips with it and those barriers aren't so daunting. The other thing is around terminology. So really basically to explain what you're talking about. And so a glossary or kind of footnotes, key terminology, anything that can explain it a bit better is helpful. The other thing is providing documentation for different user types. So the audience for an API is not homogeneous. There is all sorts, especially in a museum context. There's people who are museum professionals, people who are data scientists, people who are hobbyists, people who have been tasked with something as part of a course as a student or as part of their job at a different institution. So understanding those user types and documenting the API for each of those is also very important. The other thing is example projects. Seeing what other people have done is always so inspirational, and just being able to kind of get those creative ideas and to understand what's possible is a really big help in terms of getting people over that lump of whether they should engage with an API or not. And sort of following into that is comprehensive examples. So that might be based on things that people have done or documentation about what you can do or could do. So it's basically leading by example, showing rather than telling. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of charts from the report that was produced. And you can see on the top left, there was the kind of audience breakdown of the participants that they had. And so you see there was a mixture of students, hobbyists, tech professionals, and museum professionals. And there's the graph sort of places them on a continuum of technical skills against museum knowledge. And then on the bottom right there's a bar chart that shows what people express they were interested in when they come to use an API. And interestingly, the artist/creator is top of the stack there. So people look for people is something that is a truism almost, and especially in web development and data usage, often that's what we'll see. And so it's great to see that confirmed by the participants. And then following that, you see images, dates, exhibition history. And that's something that isn't always present in a lot of APIs. It's like, when was a piece shown? When was it displayed in a gallery? When was it loaned to another gallery? So those are all sort of things that people are interested in. And then also, gratifyingly, link to other data sets is high up there. So that interconnectedness of all things, and whether collection items from one institution can be correlated with others or connected through to thesauri or other data sources is always a key demand, especially from those who've got an extensive knowledge of working with APIs. Next slide, please. So taking these findings from the Pratt Institute and rolling them into our own approach to documentation, we've been working on an iterative process to really try and produce a engaging and audience-focused documentation, kind of microsite, for want of a better word, that will really help people get to grips with the Cooper Hewitt's new API and really engage with it early and quickly, and that will deliver those 5 recommendations from the Pratt study. So the kind of key features that we're looking to include or have already produced are a narrative structure that starts with the breadth and depth of the collection, so really selling the collection, and like how amazing it is, what great things it's got in it, the amount of different things that you can explore. And then that's followed by how the API enables you to access that data. And basically then the end of the narrative is examples of usage. So you can kind of see the kind of arc goes across. This is an amazing set of data. This is how you use it. And this is things you can do with it. A glossary, so that key requirement from the Pratt report, and we agree completely. And that's produced some interesting overlaps in terminology. So for example, what does object mean if you're a software developer? What does object mean if you're a museum professional? So those things kind of overlap and they need explaining, even if it seems obvious to you in your particular context. The other thing that we'd be doing is an anatomy of a record. So really taking the data of an individual record and breaking it down into tiny pieces and explaining each field and each kind of data that comes out of that. So then it's easy to understand what you would do with it if you were using it. So, and as part of that, we found we've needed to iterate often as we've been writing, as we've been documenting, to kind of find the right explanations of how to query the API via GraphQL. And initially you think, oh, this is easy, I'll just start in this way and I'll just write one step after the other. But actually each audience has its own way of coming at things. So we found we've had to iterate that, and we've actually had to go back out to the world to kind of help us to understand what they need and how we should document it. And then the last thing is we've been thinking of fun interfaces, and we're developing a fun interface to help users understand both the data and the collection itself. So something that's quick and easy to really get in there. And we've got an example of a prototype of that on the next slide. So Kang, please.
Yeah.
Right, so this is a video recording of the prototype, which has just been made up in Figma. And so you can see here, it's basically a spin the wheel interactive. So it's essentially drawing a random choice of 2 criteria and then showing you how you would query that. And a feature of GraphQL is that you can opt for how many fields or how much content you want to show as part of the results. So it gives you control of that. Then you see the data set that comes back from it. It's showing you that, but it's also displaying what that data represents. So you can see here a nice little image and its text. So it's a quick way to be able to understand objects without having to have prior knowledge of them, and to be able to see what data you'll be working with. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. And I really like the spinning wheel. It looks very fun. Can't wait to see it. So now we are proceed our second section with the panel, with the Q&A section. We'd like to hear your question. We'd like to hear your story. Please give us, shoot us any questions. If you have any, either on the chat. Okay. If no one have anything come out of mind, I do have one question that I want to ask Rob. I'm very interested when you say, because myself as a developer, I'm very interested when you said developer like feel like can build everything. Like I feel like I can build everything. If you give me enough time and money, I can build a rocket or something. Well, I probably can, but a lot of developers want to, we like to get hands-on. But you say don't do it. There's a lot of things already there. I believe there's a lot of museum when they're trying to build an API, they will be like, oh, there's a lot of framework to choose from. There's a lot of library to choose from. What is good for us? Why I cannot build it, or I should build it?
Well, it wasn't that institutions shouldn't. It was that aspects of that process are quite often ignored when decisions are made. So things like what the lifespan of the API is expected to be, how institutions are going to manage things like staff leaving, knowledge transfer, updates, changes. So it was more about making sure that wherever possible you reuse technologies that are out there, just to make sure that as much as possible you can be insulated from those types of ongoing, so as an example, GraphQL as a query language in its own right, you can roll REST APIs and deliver them using your own mechanisms. But when it comes to things like GraphQL, there are tools and kits out there that can kind of allow you to relatively to get started relatively easily, and to piggyback on a lot of work that's done in other sectors. And the other tendency for which we've talked about as well for developers is to kind of answer the questions that they want answered. So to kind of write technologies that reflect their views on the things. So I think the great thing about this process was that we had the study to start with, so we could look at that, and that's why things like GraphQL, that when Peter was saying people look for people, think technologies like GraphQL allow you to, relatively simply ask questions like, tell me about the people who designed your posters, as opposed to trying to work out the posters and then have a look through multiple API queries to kind of work through and find out more information that way. So, and also, where you build on established technologies, you get access to tools that can help. So, the uptake of APIs, as has been said earlier, in terms of how you get your audience to engage with them. Things like GraphQL have great tools for playing with the content, visualization, etc. So it kind of means that getting people to engage with it, you've got a big backup behind you, if you like. As I said, it wasn't really saying that you shouldn't, but it was also just kind of saying that if you can piggyback on other sectors or other technologies and look at doing it, you quite often get a more efficient approach to delivering it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob. I think it's a great takeaway. Also to help you figure out, do you really need to go through that, or you should use other people's resources? Josh asked the question, said he has curatorial records at times reflect uncertainty, while APIs like clean data. Example creation dates are sometimes estimates or ranges. How best can/should APIs handle those situations? That's we deal every day.
Yeah.
I think that maybe Wendy, you can briefly answer a little bit on these questions, and maybe Rob or Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's more of a Robert Peter question. I mean, I agree. Our data is not always straightforward. We have a lot of design objects in our collections where the first design was 1930, but the piece in our collection is 1950. And how do you adequately present that to the public is a great question.
Yeah, I mean, dates are pretty much the worst thing to pick on. So great question. Essentially. You've got you've got to not certainty in terms of the content, but in terms of searching, I suppose it's the distinction between, you know, when somebody's searching for something, let's say 1960 in the example that Peter gave, the discussions around, you know, if something's got a date range from 1940 to 1970, it's important to recognize that actually what you're trying to do with an API is make sure that people get a chance to find what they're looking for. You're not necessarily dealing in certainty yourself. What you're doing is making the API helpful. So trying to make it deal with that kind of squishy value in a way that will help the user connect with it. So when it comes to things like dates and text, making sure that you've got routines that look at the content and start to pull out things like years, that, you know, pull out the certainty that you can, and recognize that, you know, if you can allow users to use that and to make their queries connect with that, then when the data can say approximately, or it might be, or somebody said that this was true in 1960, but we now know it isn't. All of those things are okay to show in the data. The thing that's important is to make sure that people asking the questions connect with that data, and that's the job of the API. It's not trying to assert certainty on the data. It's just trying to connect the people with stuff that they might be interested in, might help them on their journey.
Yeah, Chad also follow up this question about what about revisions and historical values? Are people interested in how records evolve over time? Like, can we provide them like different version, like you know, different time of the data?
Shall I?
Yeah.
Sorry, it seemed I don't want to be monopolized.
Okay, maybe
so please,
Peter, how do you think?
Okay. Yeah, I think that's actually a very interesting question, and I think that's actually not well served by APIs in general. So in almost all cases, you'll see the latest version of a record from any given API. And so there may actually be value in exploring that kind of thing, is like the history, the kind of meta history of metadata almost, and being able to chart that. And that may be something like GraphQL and the infrastructure can support as a sort of, as you might have seen in the glimpse you saw of the records, that GraphQL, you can kind of add more or less data to your result. And so that might be an option that's little used, but very valuable to a particular kind of research.
Thank you, Peter. Do we have any more questions?
I mean, if there aren't, I can expand on that last one a little bit as well, from the kind of data side behind the scenes. So I basically was just going to echo what Peter said, but also to kind of flag that there's the historical data that's kind of captured within the collections management system, like, you know, previous descriptions and things that have been kind of superseded or were written by somebody a number of years ago and are no longer considered to be valid. And then essentially there's the stuff outside that which isn't necessarily even captured within the context of the collections management system. The solution that we've built for the Cooper Hewitt does retain all of the versions of all of the data, but I think the question about at what granularity that is useful is a really interesting one, and I think technically it's certainly feasible to deliver with what we've built, but yeah, the question about how deep you go with that is an interesting one.
Sure. We have another question from sorry, I cannot see your name from the Zoom, but how about you just say the questions? Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for this discussion.
Oh, Josh, okay.
Another, I added the earlier question, so sorry to dominate, but the Pratt study also called out providing CSV data dumps for easy use and lower barrier to entry. And I just want to second that. It's something we're thinking about at the Art Institute of Chicago, but you know, just I want to acknowledge that the format that we're you know, transmitting all this data, often it's JSON, is really challenging for a lot of people who are unfamiliar with the technology. And we all talk about wanting our audiences to play with our data and make amazing visualizations and other tools. But I just wanted to call out and second, what the Pratt study was saying is that we really need to make it easy to use, and more a comment than a question, but I just want to say thanks to everybody for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. That's great, and I'm glad your feedback. It's really nice to know. We do have 5 minutes left, and so I think we probably should wrap up this panel, but we were more than happy to continue the conversation with you on the Slack, or I can put on my email here. So you can all send me email if you want. So we have a final 2 slides. First, Peter going to say what's next for the documentation.
Thank you, Kang. So we're building the documentation as a WordPress site, a kind of microsite based on the Cooper Hewitt's main theme, so that it's part of the unified design approach for the whole of the web properties of the museum. And then the next steps are really to build out that example interactive, so that you saw the kind of prototype for, basically working with the team to find great example of objects that supports that. So it's Josh, a little bit go back to what you were saying, is kind of trying to make things feel less daunting, because Jason is kind of a bit hardcore when you're new to it. You're like, what is this stuff? And being able to relate it to objects and to see instantly what that data represents is something that we really want to try and drive through this documentation. And actually, yes, the CSV version will be available of the data too. So yeah, we're definitely following along with that recommendation. And then the other thing is just continue iterating, always the central core of any successful digital project. So iterating the documentation, really focusing on ease of comprehension and the kind of editorial sort of subtleties that reflect each of the audience's needs. And then a really nice thing is that looping back to the beginning, we have further engagement from the Pratt Institute. So we have some students from the Institute who are leading on further user engagement and basing that in the methodology that kicked this all off in the first place. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, thank you so much. So if you want to go to making API for a museum, we should give you some takeaway from this slide. What is really important? First, the who and what it is for. Why do you want the API? What do you intend to serve this API for? What do you want them to use the API for? And then how you're going to promote it if you have an API. First, it's nice documentation, as we just mentioned, like a lot. And then some examples like a spinning wheel to engaging people to reuse that. And then the API also need to be quick and reflect the changes from your database, either it's a TMS or other different database, and it need to be easy to use, hence the documentation. Like if you have good documentation, the user will be much easier to get into the user API, and hence they will be more happy to promote it and build more application around it. And the third is scalable. Like we say, iteration. If your API is not able to scale, not able to like make it more featured, it's very hard to make a new feature. It will, you have to reinvent a wheel like anytime soon. Like we don't want that. So thank you so much for joining the session, and please keep the conversation flowing, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Kang, can I say some final words before we close?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sorry, Byron.
Thank you, Kang, and thank you for everyone else for this fantastic session. My name is Barry Joseph. I'm one of the 3 chairs of the MCN Experience Design and Immersive Technology series, of which this is the final round. In about 15 minutes, this and the other 5 sessions will be coming together to review highlights from today's theme and hold a discussion across all attendees. You've been listening so patiently for the last 2 hours. Now you get to talk. Let's explore the themes that you noticed across the sessions. Come hear about the ones that you couldn't come to. And we hope in a few minutes we can see you then and you can all join the conversation. Thank you.